Hello and welcome to a new episode of Phrasally Verbocious. Hello, Alan.
Hello, everybody.
First off, thanks for all the comments and listens so far. Claudia mentioned it was nice to hear an almost RP accent. I assume you're talking about me. Compared to Alan's Culture accent. And Santiago Silva Barrera commented that it was a great podcast and was hoping someone would do a teaching podcast like this. Well, thank you. And thank you for all the other comments as well.
Today in the podcast, we're going to talk about professionalism in ELT. Originally, we were going to have this take up one episode, but we feel there is two different aspects that need discussed in detail. One being that of the teachers themselves, and one being that of private academies who employ teachers. So today, this is part one of two of professionalism in ELT, the teachers. This was inspired by an online discussion I noticed where the teacher in question had asked readers, at what point do you give up on a class? So the context of this situation was, basically the administrators of a school had said, this is only a requirement, we don't care for the class. The university students in question did not care for said class because they knew it was only a requirement to hit a sign-in sheet. And the only person who actually cared about said class was the teacher in the room. Now, yeah, you may be the only person who cares. However, there is still a line between being a professional and giving up. So for me, this sort of did annoy me a bit because for me, at no stage do you actually give up on a classroom. You try out new things, you try out new ideas, you try and encourage engagement. So Chris, is the only time you use the words give up in ELT when you're trying to explain phrasal verbs?
I assume you're referring to the fact that give up is a phrasal verb rather than my attitude when I'm teaching them. Yes. And I'm assuming that the people that are going to listen to this podcast are not surprised by that answer. If they are, I hope we can convince them otherwise. Because, as you just said, you're the professional and you're the paid professional in the classroom. And you're somebody who is, even when you have your most trying classes, and in my experience of teaching in inner city UK secondary school contexts, I can assure you that I've not had anything anywhere near as trying in ELT as I have in that high school environment. And even then, and especially then, you have no position to give up because it is literally what you're paid to do. I think sometimes the professionalism is the topic of today's conversation, and I think sometimes it's easy to overstate and dramatize how important teachers are, but at the same time it's easy to underdo it as well, in the sense of when we're out of the classroom, I am not a teacher. I am a human being with a life, but at the same time the same applies to doctors, right? And doctors don't give up on patients because they're dying. That literally is their job. But at the same time, when they're not in the clinic or they're not in the hospital, they're not doctors, they're human beings. And whilst we're not talking about life and death in the ELT classroom, we still have a job to do, no matter how difficult it might be. And it is incumbent upon us, therefore, to find the way to engage, to inspire, or help even just that one student get over the line that they need to get over in order to achieve the goal that they set themselves. Or that their parent, or their university, or their employer has set for them to achieve.
Do you think there's something in teaching is one of those professions that we've obviously been in it for long enough, we know what goes on behind the scenes, whereas a student shows up for 90 minutes and that's all they see?
Oh yes, I mean, I'm sure that some of my younger students particularly are convinced that I live under the table in my room.
Speaking of which, just off topic but on topic, I had a delightful conversation with a student last week. She couldn't work out the fact that she wanted to understand the logistics between, she asked me in Spanish, of course, she was only 8 years old. She asked me, how do I come from Ireland to class every day for work? Why don't you have a school in Ireland instead? Which I thought was delightful. Not the first time I've had that either. Won't be the last.
I think the context, that kind of question is really important, actually. I know that you're telling it as an anecdote, but I have those anecdotes as long as my arm. I used to teach but this is back home. I used to teach in a school in South East Wales, and I'm talking about teenage age students. Okay, their worlds being the size that they were, their heads exploded when I told them I drove from Cardiff every day to come and teach them. they couldn't get it into their head that somebody would drive for 40 minutes to come to work. Well, yeah, this is where the job is. I soon realised I had to be very careful that I didn't sort of give too much of this global citizen impression to them, because I mentioned in passing that I was going to London for the weekend, and I just had this shocked tutor group. But that's hours away. Yes, I will go home after work on Friday, get my bag, get on the train. I'll be in London by dinner time. And but yeah, from their point of view, you are there as you're there as a teacher, and you don't necessarily exist outside of that classroom. And all teachers have got the stories of when they see kids in the supermarket, in the street, in the park. And if you teach adult students in the bar or in the club, and the sort of surprise and shock that even adults can have when they see you out in the wild.
In the wild, I like that.
Yeah, and because and you're different, and often actually you don't get seen by students, and it's not that they're ignoring you. I've walked past students, and I mean students that wouldn't ignore me. I've walked past them within a matter of meters, waving in their face, and they haven't seen me because you're in the wrong place and you're not wearing the clothes that you wear, and you're not being a teacher.
They've literally never seen you outside of. They're expecting to see a whiteboard behind you or a smartboard.
Whiteboard behind you, shirt on you, particular shoes on your feet, a particular way of holding yourself, and here you are being normal. You don't make any sense in that context.
One of the points that I know we've discussed in the past is that it is that regardless of all the planning that goes on behind the scenes and how much time you put into making a class, it is your job, the professional teacher's job, to make the most constructive use of time in that classroom. So if you do have a class where you have 90 minutes and you think the students have given up, you've got to make that as useful as humanly possible. It's still what is going on in your classroom. You're the adult, even if you're in a room of other adults. You're the adult with authority.
Yep.
What goes on is still your responsibility.
And you have to take that responsibility, and you have to. It's not just being the authority. You have to be the authority. You have to take it and be like, no, we're doing this, folks, because that's what you're paying me for. Or, well, not necessarily in those. I mean, sometimes I do use those words, but not always. But in the sense of because this is my classroom, and this is about as much about classroom management, behaviour management, discipline as it is about professionalism. It's the same conversation. What happens in those four walls in that 90 minutes is up to me. And I think that also goes both ways, in that, yes, you may have planned something, but you get there and the students present differently. You may have to be the professional and go, okay, so I spent half an hour planning this, and I printed that worksheet, and I found that text that I wanted to use, but they're not having it today. So it's a waste. So I'll file that, I'll make use of it, that's not wasted planning preparation time, I'll use that, but today is not the best time to use that material. And I think it's about having that flexibility and having that professional streak to say, actually, that's not what I need to do today, that's not going to work out, we'll do this instead.
I think one of the easy examples of that situation is when you have repeat classes in a week. So for example, I have 3 FCE classes, Monday and Tuesday, and then they repeat again on Wednesdays and Thursdays. So I will do the same class 3 times. However, I don't think any of those classes ever go the same way, because I know once you know the personalities in the classroom, you know how certain people are going to adapt. My adult class is going to be different from the teens class, and my second adult class, because they're young professionals, where my other class are more university students, that's going to be completely different again. So it is up to the teacher to make that professional decision, going, okay, we'll do this bit here. But in this class, I'm going to discuss something different, but it's still going to be on topic.
Yeah.
And obviously with teenagers especially, they might be doing B2, but they're not going to have, job experience, work experience. This week we were talking, the topic was different films and top grossing films. So obviously, the adults who had all watched Snow White, Gone with the Wind, and The Exorcist, well, obviously the kids are not going to have seen that, the teens. So, even the source material you use changes, knowing your audience.
Yeah, and that's part of being responsible, that's part of being professional, that's part of being a teacher. And I think what comes with experience is... Actually, that sounds onerous. It sounds onerous. if you know you have the same class 3 times, it sounds onerous to think that you're going to plan 3 different classes. But actually what comes with experience is that your skeleton plan is exactly the same. And it's just having the confidence as well. And I think that's such a key word. I know we're going to come to teachers that sort of appear and disappear within 5 minutes of arriving later on, but it comes with time, the confidence to make those, first of all, those judgment calls. This isn't going to work today. I'm going to ditch this and I'm going to go over there. Or I'm going to go where the students are and I'll leave this. Because I can catch up this grammar point next class. We're not in the mood for this technical grammar point. I'm going to leave it. And we're going to spend 30 minutes doing speaking practice. Because that's what they're in the mood for. And it's not that they are in, and this is the danger as well, is that again, being professional means you're responsible and you're making the call. It isn't that, they're not in the mood, so I won't bother with that grammar today, or next week, or the week after. This is not the lesson this is not the moment where this is going to be best well received. I will leave this for next time, and what I'll do instead is I'll do some speaking practice here. Because as a teacher, I'm making the decision that's the best use of this time. It's not the students are leading my lesson plan, and it's not like they know that I've changed my lesson plan.
I'm sitting there fully aware. For example, on Monday night, just for example, my FCE class, my B2s, would have done a listening around 8:30, whereas the same class the next night, different students, I knew there was extra stuff that they would have needed, or extra conversation to get it out of them. So therefore, I don't think it was until about 9:15 we did the listening. It's the same material, but I completely flipped around the plan.
Yeah. The order you do it in. And then when you do that kind of thing, or when you do put something off that you put in the plan, you're there with your notebook anyway, making a note. Okay, I didn't do that, and I know that I found myself doing it. Or I've chosen not to do that exercise today for whatever reason. I'm going to put it over there, and there's nothing wrong with that, and that's being responsible, and making professional decisions about your own classroom.
Okay, moving on to CPD, which is something quite important to the both of us, continued professional development. Being a professional, this is also quite an important thing that some people take very seriously. Some people tend not to, would that be fair? But this is one of those things that it's not down to your academy or your school. It is really down to the teacher themselves to work on their CPD, especially with conferences and that kind of thing.
I think I'm going to disagree with you slightly, and I think this will come up when we talk about employers next week, because I actually do think it's the employer's responsibility. I think it's yours as a professional, but I also think it's your employers as well, and that's something that perhaps we'll cover next week. But yeah, I think in this industry where we work in, I think people often see an initial qualification as being certified stamp, and it isn't. And in fact, they're often referred to as initial teacher training courses or initial teacher education courses. Initial being the key word, as in this is your first go. Now, I come from a very particular kind of teaching background. I was a high school teacher before I was an ELT teacher, and actually while I did my CELTA, because all the advice I read was do the CELTA, because if you haven't got the CELTA, your CV won't even be looked at. So I did my CELTA part-time, and I was actually supply teaching in the UK at the time, and I did amuse myself that in the space of 1 week, while doing my CELTA part-time, I will have taught about 3 times as many hours as I did for the entire CELTA course. I think that puts it in some sort of perspective that actually, in lots of jobs, on your first day, you will do as much teaching as your entire CELTA. I think it's fair to say it is simply an initial teaching course. It is simply a taster, and to think that once you've done that, you're done. I think it's perhaps a harsh word, but I would say it's naive.
Yeah, but like you said, it is one of those things that because everything is electronic now, if your CV doesn't have those 5 letters of CELTA or CELT or the Trinity equivalent, you're not even going to get looked at. You could have taught for 15 years and just don't have a CELTA, but your CV might actually fall through the cracks.
Yeah. Yeah, well, when they get the 200 applications for the 3 jobs they've got opening up, they're looking for any reason to discard you. I'm not decrying the CELTA or the DIP TESOL. I'm just saying that, the CERT TESOL, excuse me. I just think that they are what they are, which is initial. And I've done a PGC. I've done my CELTA. I regularly go to Even still, I regularly go to conferences, workshops, webinars, make a teaching podcast and discuss stuff and be prepared to be wrong. I don't think I know anywhere near enough. We're both looking at diplomas. I think you have to have that attitude of the CELTA got me going, and I've got some experience, and I've got some things to bounce it off, but I need to learn more stuff. I need to learn about more things. And that can be reading books, it can be webinars, it can be conferences.
Yeah, but I still think it is up to the teacher to decide how far down the rabbit hole do they really want to go.
Yes. Oh no, I agree with that. But I don't think that employers can, or that employers should say, oh well, it's the teacher's responsibility. I'll just palm that off to them. Because of the way the industry is, and because there are many people who, if you've only done a CELTA, you perhaps don't know about all the things that are available to you to help you progress. And therefore it's not. That's
true. Yeah. I think it's the academy's responsibility to go, here are your options for a start. Whether the old metaphor, the academy could show you the door, but you have to walk through it, sort of thing.
Make you aware and support and be there, and not necessarily financially, but financial support is always welcome. But certainly, but support those decisions, encourage those decisions. Yeah, I think so, and I think providing the means to allow you to realise your professional development activities.
Another point that does get brought up now and then in the industry is, now this isn't a technical term, but this is what I've written down, is 1 year wonders. So people who maybe would leave university or leave some form of study from the UK or Ireland, head off to one of the corners of the world, teach.
Warmer climes normally.
Normally, yeah. Well, outside of Ireland, it's guaranteed. What they would do, teach for a year and then return to their home country and get a job in a non-teaching aspect. That used to be just a standard thing that you did. Now that I've been in this industry for going on 7 years now, is it damaging the industry? Is it giving the industry a bad name? Is it making it not as professional as it should be?
It's about 18 questions there. Is it damaging the industry or the perception of the industry? I don't think so, because I don't think people know. And I think that's something I think we'll talk about in a moment, about the students' perspectives about what they, or the parents and what they do and they don't know. But I don't know that the majority of people necessarily would realise, because they enrol their kids at an institution to teach them English, and they assume that the institution has hired people with requisite qualifications and experience, right?
Yeah.
But as far as it damaging for the industry, well, I would say yes.
Because I think the flip side of it is people are then happier to take a lower wage if they know they're only going to be there 9 months and then head home again.
Yeah.
So it's
damaging in that sense for the workers, because exactly, people were being undercut. This is my job, right? So when I get defensive about it, it's because it's my livelihood.
Yeah.
People always say, "Oh, will you ever return to the UK?" I can't do this job in the UK, so probably not certainly not in the short term, and probably not in the medium term, because I can't do this there. So when you come over here and you take a job, will you take a job that therefore I can't have, and you're accepting a salary that perhaps I would rather not accept, which means that my salary gets lowered as a result. So there's a knock-on effect in terms of employment.
There was a very good article I read on, I think it's ELT advocacy in Manchester in Ireland. They had an article where they described the industry in general as invisible to people in the UK and Ireland and actual native speaking countries, because unless you're actually in the industry for probably more than 2 years to sort of get a feel for it, you don't really know what goes on. You don't really know. You're not exposed to turning it into a career.
No, and I think what other people that I think you mentioned there as well is actually the way you describe it. If you described anything else that way, you'd actually hear how insulting it was.
Yeah.
Oh, I finished my degree. I'll just pop over to so and so and teach this for a year, and then I'll go back and get my real job.
That's the phrase that is freakishly more common than you would like to think. Yeah.
Than you would like to think, and like
the
you
word
want to hear.
real job.
The real job bit. But also this notion that because you've This is the question of native speaker versus non-native speaker that we'll come to later in the season. But again, it's that insulting idea that because you're a native, you can just rock up in a foreign country and teach a class.
Yeah, it's offensive to the local workforce as well.
Oh, well, that's who I was referring to actually in the first instance, but actually, to me as well and to you as well, who have trained and have experience. Not that inexperienced teachers are necessarily a bad thing, of course. But there's a difference between an inexperienced teacher and somebody who rocks up to teach for a year while they figure out the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Which I don't have a lot of patience for, I'll be honest. And actually, speaking of which, we move on to the fact that from the student's point of view, that's I don't know. I think sometimes I wonder, and I don't talk, and I'm not referring to practices that I've experienced, but practices that I've heard about. I'll keep our lawyers happy. But no, in all seriousness, I'm not talking about anything I've experienced myself. I'm talking about things that I've heard about in the industry. If the paying customers, because that's what they are, if the paying customers knew who was being hired or what was going on behind closed doors, I don't know. I think they'd be shocked.
I think the industry would change overnight, straight away. Especially if you see the issue I have with it is because, for example, this is just an example. Take a C1 student you would have. Now they are either, possibly, young adult leaving high school to go into university. They need a C1 for the university. In university, trying to do an Erasmus or something, move to a different country. Therefore, they need legally a C1, or they are part of the local workforce and they need a C1 themselves for communicating with customers, clients, whatever, externally. I would be genuinely concerned if I was paying, a Spanish tutor whose only qualification is their passport.
Well, yeah, that sums it up really. I don't have an awful lot to add. And I think when you then put into the perspective the fact that there are countless, as you say, local workforce, countless Spanish people with myriad qualifications, very experienced, very qualified, often experienced in teaching, who struggle to get positions teaching English because there are plenty of people with passports. I think that's problematic, and I think it also causes cultural problems between local people and ELT teachers.
Yeah, almost as if there's especially it happens more in the towns where there's a known local ELT workforce that appear for 9 months and then they know they're gone.
Yeah.
Because you were talking about we're obviously going to talk about natives and non-natives in the future, but it was one of those things as well. I actually think genuinely in a job interview, one of the very first questions should actually be, what languages do you speak? And if you don't have a certificate in a second language, what language are you learning?
What are you working on right now? How are you a language learner? So that you know what's going on from that point of view. Okay, so Alan, the job's not working out. So, as a professional, how do you leave?
This is one of those, it's almost like a taboo subject in ELT, really, isn't it? Leaving a position for genuine professional reasons.
Or for that matter, professional or personal reasons.
Or personal reasons, yes, or personal reasons. Because obviously people have different lives they come from as well. The taboo subject really is what, how, and when. So generally, when you sign a job contract, you have 2 weeks' notice, 1 month's notice, based on what you do and where you do it. So the discussion is always, should that suffice year round, or I mean, you do have, you generally will have children and people in front of you as well. Should there be a teaching rule for you don't leave between Easter and summer, because that is sort of, crunch time for your students?
I think it's difficult to... I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, so I think it's difficult to say that because...
Oh, no, I completely agree. I don't think there is a perfect answer.
No, I'm sure that you don't. But I think before we go down the rabbit hole too far, I just think it's important to bear in mind you can never know what someone's individual circumstances are.
Yeah.
And their reasons for leaving. You can never really know. Even if you think you know, you can never really know. And somebody may have a genuine reason why they absolutely have to go on the 1st of May.
Yeah.
And those I think it's one of those. It's a case by case, perhaps a case by case situation. I know that in the UK, high school teaching, for example, you have to give a half term's notice, and there's a deadline. If you want to leave at Christmas, you have to resign by October half term, which means the next time you can leave is Easter. By which point you have to have resigned by February half term, which can mean that if you decide, or you need for some reason to leave, and you decide that in November, you can't leave until April. Which is a long time.
Yeah.
And I think that's obviously that's also too far the other way as well. It puts far too much onus on far too much of pressure on the employee to know what they're doing and to know what's going on and to not have a life or to make decisions that will impact the future. But I think I agree with you in principle that unless you've got a specifically good reason, which might in the sense of you're moving to another job, and they need you on that date, otherwise you haven't got it, or you have some sort of health or personal reason why you have to leave sort of in the middle of May, then I would agree with you and say, look, at Easter you've only got a couple of months. There should be no reason to leave at that point.
It is one of those strange things, especially as teaching, because it is a very personal job, especially with younger ones, because you have that rapport, and for a student to just walk in and go, "Oh, who are you?"
Yeah. When they've got an exam in 2 weeks, I think the thing is, I know people who have vanished. I know people who've done that, in May, and that's incredibly irresponsible and incredibly unprofessional. I don't necessarily know the inside story, and it's very easy for me to make a judgment call on that. But if I don't know the inside story, I shouldn't make a judgment call on it. At the same time, I know people who've left with 4 weeks' notice a little earlier in the year. Simply because, as I just said, they had a job offer. They needed that job. That job's going to be carrying on, as opposed to the job that they had, which was going to finish. And they were going. It was their career path. And in any other job, there would be no question about it. There would never be a raised eyebrow. I mean, your employer may not be thrilled that you're leaving, but they would accept the fact that you've made a career choice and that you've given your month's notice and everyone's happy. But teaching is not like any other job because of all the rapport you were talking about and the fact that it is a personal job and you have rapport with your students. But ultimately, the only person that you can only be accountable for is yourself, and your students will move on. They'll cope with the fact that you left halfway through the year. So I think it's both. It's not the same as any other job, but I think we could be a bit more towards treating it like any other job rather than this kind of 9-month slavish dedication to one thing. I also think that within the ELT industry in Spain, and that's the industry that you and I know, it's also a little bit, and we'll talk about this next week, but it's also a little bit rich to ask employees to have that kind of 9-month dedication when employers generally don't offer anything more than a 9-month contract. It's a two-way street. If you want all of that from me, I want all of that from you. Now, the reality is that a responsible professional will give their all because they have a contract to fulfill.
That's true. There is a very strong argument for the two-way street here does not exist. So overall, basically, regardless of whether you're in the industry for a year or a lifetime, which is probably what Chris and myself would be in for,
you get less for murder.
When you're in that classroom, the responsibility is still that of the teacher, and the teacher's responsibility is to teach and engage students in the best means possible.
On that note, thank you for listening to us again this week. If you'd like to join in the conversation with us, you can find us on Twitter.
We are at Phrasally.
You can email us.
Phrasally@gmail.com.
And you can rate, comment, and subscribe on your favourite podcasting service. Goodbye.
Goodbye.